Welcome to the second still experimental episode of Drawing Me Out with Bill Willingham, that's me, and Brad Thomte.
That's me. And when you say experimental, I hope it's not like, Beatles 1960s monkey's head kind of experimental.
Well, no, I think more experimental as in, is this something worth doing? Is it going to find an audience that derives value from this? So in that sense, they are the monkeys we're experimenting on, to employ your metaphor. They're the rhesus monkeys that's going into the shock tank right now.
We did have a couple questions after the last episode, with the first/last episode. One of which you had mentioned when you turn in art pages, when you want to send something to them, your 6-page setup. What should those 6 pages include? Okay,
that is a very good question. I'm going to act as if I didn't know this question was coming and that I don't have the art below these to prepare my answer. Let's move these things out of the way. These are some of the things that are on the art table currently. This is actually, when I was looking for something else, I found this. It's an old sketch I did, a convention sketch, just for myself, in the sense of if someone would have shown up to want it, of course I would have sold them the sketch. But this character, you may not recognize him. He's called the Veteran. And he was a recurring character during my run on Robin. That's Robin as in, Batman's boon companion. And that was a few years ago. And the Veteran was a super-powered military character who ran a military squad who tried to recruit Robin into the military. And he gave it some serious consideration. He was tempted to leave Batman and join this group for a while. Tempted, but as we know, didn't quite do it. So, Brad, can you put this sketch up on the eBay offerings for this episode?
I absolutely can. There'll be a link in the description down below.
And we'll see if anyone is interested in the Veteran. Let's set that aside. This is something I've been working on. So,
just to let these guys know, this is just kind of some of the art you've got still going on. It's not the answer to the question. The answer to the question is coming ever so quickly.
No, this is a cover project for something. It is actually, here's 2 of the 3. It's actually going to be that big, but we're working our way sort of this way. So that's something.
That is a large batch of characters in one spot.
Yep. I will not be coloring this myself. I'm giving it over to another colorist, and so I wanted to make it as heinous a job as could be, because of course everyone knows everyone hates colorists. That's not true, but anyway. So the question was 6 sample pages to give to an editor to show that you can draw comics. What kind of pages should they be? Have I paraphrased that?
Yes.
Accurately? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, here's what you don't want. Don't give 6 pages of pinups, of heroic characters and heroic poses, single illustrations. In those 6 pages, you need to prove that you can tell a story with your visuals. That is the essence of comics. Remember last time we said comics are graphic images set in a sequence in order to tell a story, which is exactly why the very first written language of human beings 70,000 years ago were comics. And it's the only universal language still. Everyone can read images. They're born with that ability. Not everyone can read written languages. That's why images are constantly used as the default setting for universal language. Look at your road signs. Look at your symbols. the skull on the bottle of poison to indicate poison. Comics will always be the universal language that everybody knows. I think that's why it's so powerful. I used to participate in debates with novelists that comics were kind of like a Johnny-come-lately medium. Well, I'm sorry, but symbolic-based written languages have only been around for a few thousand years. Comic books, 70,000 years, and that date's always been pushed back as we find earlier and earlier examples of cave paintings. You novelists, you prose writers, you're the Johnny-come-latelys. But don't worry, we've set a very, very nice congenial environment for you. You're more than welcome to come in and see if this trendy little prose thing works out. Oh. Graphic images set in sequence in order to tell a story. The kind of examples you should use are examples that show that you can tell a story with your pages in multiple panels. Don't do splash pages. If you absolutely insist on including a splash page with your 6 pages, one only, and even then consider not doing it. Editors want to see that you can tell a story. For an example, I've used the first page of a story I did for, well, if you read there, it was going to be called Shock Treatment. I think it eventually was published as Twitch. It was a DC horror anthology. And my submission that I wrote, drew, inked, did not color, was called It Takes a Village. But it's set in the city. And the reason you know this is the very first panel shows that it's a city. It's set in a Monsters for All Occasions costumes and more shop. The reason you know that is after the city, I zoomed in on another exterior establishing shot that shows the exterior of the location, which is a costume shop.
So let me take a wild guess. We're actually even further into that building in the offices.
Yes. And then we're in the office. And even though the main conversation is taking place here, we see enough of the office to establish that it is an office. There's a reception desk. There's a receptionist that has an unfortunate kind of business going on under her skirt. She has obviously this is an expensive place. It's got one of those objets d'art behind the reception to show that this is not a fly-by-night affair. A little warning. If you draw this in the first establishing shot and you're going to have this receptionist appear later, as she did several pages in, you'll be drawing that same bit of art again and again and again. This first time, I loved drawing that bit of art in the background. About the 4th time, I was kind of like, okay, guys on horses with spears and such. I've seen it. Something to keep in mind, but don't let that stop you from doing the best picture. And then you have closer on the conversation, but still in an environment where you can see things, including the receptionist who's working. Let's see some other examples also taken. I'm going to try and with these talks use examples done from my work, not because of my rampant ego, although there's that. I am, rather fascinated with myself. But so that I'm not picking on someone else. Here we have more continuity, this time with a recognizable character. This is the Huntress, and this was in a showcase DC job that I drew long ago. It is the one time that I was inked by Terry Austin, and I think he did a wonderful job covering up for many of my errors. But as you can see, it's not just pretty pictures of a superheroine. This is actually the 2nd or 3rd or 4th page of a story. She's interrupting some muggings. Some kids are taking this lady's purse. You see what she does about it. She throws a knife at the kid, and we're like, oh no. The Huntress is going to knife some poor little kid? No, it turns out she was targeting the purse itself. The kids are able to get away, but the poor lady's purse stays. The kids run away. However, one of the kids got jumped on early on. That was in the previous page. And she doesn't like his whining. And as she says goodbye to this mugging, she gives a parting shot to the fellow. That is called continuity. When editors tell you that they want pages of continuity, this is what they're talking about. The continuity between pictures. This continues to this, continues to this, continues to this, etc. That's the reason for that fancy sounding name. It means pictures in sequence telling a story. One more example. In the second part of this Huntress thing, I love showing off Terry Austin's work, and these are the last of these Huntress pages I still have. We see an action sequence where Huntress is leaping down on the main bad guy, getting away on a snowmobile. She knocks him off the snowmobile. They tumble down the cliff. They land hard at the bottom, and they have a little bit of conversation where she's telling him what a bad guy he is. And then we have a fight scene that I worked from someone else's script in this case. But as often happens in those scripts, they just say, on this page, they fight. And at the end of it, Huntress has beaten the bad guy. Well, I choreographed a fight. In this case, I used a move that we learned in the military police on how to subdue a cranky, obviously, or usually drunk suspect. You grab an arm, you pull the arm towards you, you throw an arm over it, you bend it, and you bend it back, you put the pressure right on the elbow, and you bend it back just enough to where the guy starts to hurt, and suddenly he's willing to do what you're telling him to do. The one thing you don't want to do is bend it back so far that it breaks. Oops! Unfortunately, Huntress didn't really pass military police school. She bent it back too far, it broke. And then she kicks him. I'm going to tell you something. You get an arm broken like that, the kick is redundant. He was done. But anyway, that's a fight scene. A bit of continuity showing the progression of events. That is what they're looking for when they say we want to see 6 pages of continuity to show that you can draw. Now, you need to not only do this, but you need to do at least a page this complex per day. And that brings us to what we're going to draw this time. If I don't remember if I mentioned it last time, but when I mentioned I was going to do these videos, my girlfriend said I should draw a Fables character. And I said, well, I've already decided to do a ragman, which if you've seen the previous video, you've seen. And she goes, that's a mistake. You're best known for Fables. You should draw a Fables character. But, says I didn't really draw Fables. I wrote it. She says, doesn't matter. But I drew Ragman. Doesn't matter. All right, so this time we're going to do a Fables character. And since we hope that this series of videos will continue for some time, we'll get to a lot of different Fables characters. But this time I think we should start off with Bigby Wolf. The title of this episode is The Truth About Gilligan's Island. What has that got to do with drawing a Fables character?
Well, that's an interesting point. You've been telling me for a while about your theory about Gilligan's Island. So it's kind of a little mystery that needs solved. And I think bringing in one of the best detectives there is to help us solve that's a good way to.
Is that our segue?
That's
okay.
my segue. Look
all right.
that.
No, well done. Okay.
So
I'll go with that. we're still talking to those guys that want to break in to the comics business. We'll move on to other subjects in other videos, but that's still like first and foremost. When you break into the comics business, as an artist, you pretty much know what you're going to have to be able to draw. As a writer, you need to know what you're going to be able to write. Now, some editors love, at least with early on writers, dictating the stories. We want a Superman versus Batman in this, or we want a Batman arrests Joker for the 967th time. And so you get the bones of your story handed to you editorially. However, if you're going to make a long career out of this, you have to go into someone else's sandbox. In this case, like the DCU, Superman, Batman, whatever, and come up with ideas based on what you know about that universe. The idea of exploring different premises and getting nuggets of ideas out of that is one of the things you're going to have to do if you write comics. To demonstrate that, and this is the reason I chose this as today's subject, we're going to explore the world of Gilligan's Island and see what makes that tick and what doesn't, and where the sense is in that island and where it's just goofy nonsense.
Now you say get nuggets out of other people's writing. Now that's obviously just, oh, well, what if they went this direction type of thing, without suddenly putting those characters in those situations in your writing.
Yeah, so often you're reading someone else's story, or you're watching a story on TV, and you think, oh, I see where this is going. This is going to go this way. And then it doesn't. It goes a completely different way. Well, congratulations, Mr. Writer. The thing you got wrong is now your idea. They didn't go the way you thought they were. Instead, they went a different direction. That the way you thought they were going, that's now your idea. That's your potential story. That's one of the ways in which you approach this kind of thing. So all of what's gone before, like in the Superman, Batman mythos, is now a kind of garden in which your ideas are grown. And hopefully you don't stray too far from the intent, because these are company-owned characters. With Gilligan's Island, now that's something that I grew up watching as a kid, and it's been syndicated so much that most of you are familiar with it. So what sense does this make? The thing that intrigued me most was when folks would say, what was the thing with Mr. Howell? He's a millionaire, probably a billionaire by today's standards. He's in Hawaii. He decides to get on a cheap boat for a 3-hour tour, and not one that he rents entirely himself. No, this is one in which other passengers have already signed up for this tour. And even though he's going away for a 3-hour tour, he brings at least one, there's possibly two. It's been a while since I've looked at it. I'll have to go back for continuity's sake. Trunk full of it. It seems like everything Mr. and Mrs. Howell own.
And he's the only one who did. Everyone else has, from what I gather, from what I can tell, maybe a suitcase, maybe an overnight bag, but no one had all of this stuff like the Howells did.
The only characters on that boat that would have any justification in my mind for bringing more than what they would need on a 3-hour tour would be Gilligan and the skipper, because they probably, it was not the most lavish tour affair. Chances are they were living off that boat, just like many charter captains do. So they might And yet they are the characters that never show up in a different outfit. Unless they were both fans of Einstein, Albert Einstein, who would only buy copies of the same shirts, the same suit jacket, the same pants, so that he never had to decide what to wear every day.
Whatever's just next on the shelf, you grab it off.
Yeah. All of Gilligan's, and that's why his outfit held up so well over the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years that they were there. They were all the same red shirt, the same white pants, etc. Same with Skip.
Right.
But the Howells, we're talking about the Howells. They brought these steamer trunks full of stuff. Hundreds of episodes, and then Hal was saying, well, I just decided to open this bubbly that I've been saving out of the trunk. And this is like 8 years in. This is like, yes, there's a special occasion. I brought out this bubbly out of the trunk. Yep. Oh, says young me, suspicious mind. Really? That trunk seems to contain a lot more stuff than a trunk can contain. And there is the secret of Gilligan's Island, and more importantly, the Howells. Have you figured it out yet?
Now, keep in mind, I've known you for many, many years, and unfortunately, the things you say next make sense to me.
Well, it should. Let's wind the clock back a little bit, because we're also going to talk about Joe versus the volcano.
Okay.
Weirdly, seemingly magical trunks and a voyage to an island, not deserted. It had natives, and it had a volcano that was going to blow up, and Joe was going to sacrifice himself.
Right.
But the weird set of trunks he bought played a particular role in this saga. Now, the theme of seemingly magical trunks, and by the way, I buried the lead a little bit. That's my premise. Mr. Howell kept those trunks with him on this 3-hour tour because Mr. Howell is a fake. He was not a Harvard graduate. He was not a killer businessman. He was a drifter, probably from Schenectady, who, very much like Slipping Jimmy in the wonderful Better Call Saul series, survived on the grift. And the grift is scamming people for money. And at some point, Thurston Howell, not his real name, came into possession of these magic trunks. Probably cheated someone out of them, probably stole them, who knows. The quality of these trunks that made them essential to his story that he went to Harvard and became an industrialist, became a millionaire in a legitimate way, is that these trunks would basically produce what you most wanted. You open the trunk, you reach in, and you get what you're after. He was able to get, and this is long before the internet age, documentation that showed that he went to Harvard. The special key that one gets only by graduating Harvard at the top of the class. I'm not sure if that's everyone or just their legal department. He gets everything to prove that he's a Harvard man. He actually tried out Yale first, and he didn't like the character of the documentation there, so he went back in for Harvard stuff, which is why he's eternally afraid of a Yale man. And he recreated, or created for the first time, the idea of Thurston Howell III. You can tell Lovey was never born to the rich life. She adapted to it. She was part of his grifter gang. Now, so we have a rich Thurston Howell III that can reach into his magic trunks and pull out, well, money, wads of money, many times, which he did during their stay on the Gilligans Island. Booze, fine ware, anything he needed to cement his role of millionaire. And he lived it up. He was great. The problem is you don't come across these magic trunks like this and not have anyone out there who thinks they should be owning them, or maybe the people he grifted them from. So people were after Thurston Howell, and of course took them long time because they were dependent on the magic trunks as well. These ne'er-do-wells, these dark characters capable of dark deeds.
Now, are these part of his gang, or were these people who knew of his trunks and were searching them out, or?
These were the people he probably took the trunks from, because they had become too used to the trunks to solve all their problems. So it took them a while to track him down. Remember, he established a whole new identity as Thurston Howell. But they eventually track him down. He is on the run. These people are going to do all sorts of terrible things to him to get those trunks back. There probably was more to his gang at first, but some of them, well, fell afoul of these people before they caught up to Thurston and Lovey. So Thurston is on the run. They take off for Hawaii because they had no plans for Hawaii. Therefore, there's no paper trail. As a matter of fact, they just took the trunks to the airport. He reached into the trunks, pulled out a ticket to Hawaii, and that's how they got there. The trunks provided. Once they got to Hawaii, they thought they were safe, but nope, the bad guys are on their trail again. They need to disappear for a bit. They need to come up with a new plan. What do we do? Oh, here's a boat that's leaving right now for 3 hours. That gives us 3 hours to come up with a better idea. Let's take the boat, filling up their charter slots, take the trunks with us. We never leave the trunks in the hotel or whatever. And we'll figure out what we're going to do. And that gives them a little breathing time. That's why a rich guy boards a boat for a 3-hour cruise, but takes a great big old trunk full of all sorts of stuff with him. The trunk isn't full of all sorts of stuff. It's full of potential everything.
The trunk provides all
trunk
sorts of stuff.
Provides. I mean, that's the story here. The trunk provides. So, they're on this 3-hour cruise. 3 hours later, he will have worked out something, and they could go from there. Except for there's a complication. Come on, you're right.
The weather started getting rough.
Well, the weather did, but why?
Why?
There are always complications. You don't have the hero, which in this case, the protagonist is not necessarily a heroic fellow, but he's the hero of the story. You don't have everything just go smooth sailing for them. Otherwise, you don't have a very interesting story. So you as the writer looking at the Gilligan's Island mythos comes up with, well, what if this magic trunk was sort of like the magic ring of power in Lord of the Rings, in the sense that it had its own agenda. The trunk was on its way somewhere. The trunk happened to provide the flights to Hawaii just on time. He was reaching in for a flight to anywhere because they needed to get away.
The trunk specifically needed to be in Hawaii.
The trunk provided tickets to Hawaii.
Okay.
The trunk is on its way somewhere. As we learn in Joe versus Volcano, that sometimes there are 4 of these trunks. Maybe the trunks, like any other living creature, they want to make more of themselves. They want to have little trunks.
Okay.
You'll notice the trunks in Joe versus Volcano weren't quite as magical as the ones that provided so much for Thurston Howell III. That's because they're offspring. They were still growing. They were still young. They still remembered that need to get to islands, remote islands in the Pacific or the Atlantic or whatever. We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. But the trunks have their own yearnings. Or was it the island was calling to the trunks?
Okay.
I could write that story either way. But the weather started getting rough. The reason the weather started getting rough is because it was more than a natural storm. Did the trunks provide this, or whoever's manipulating the trunks, did they provide it? This storm that blew them so off course. In a 3-hour tour, and we'll say it's only halfway done by then, because if it was the planned 3 hours, they would go out and then they would come back. In a 3-hour tour, they were blown to an island remote enough to where very few people ever found them at all. And no one ever found them where they were looking. Because there were, as we learned from the radio that never died, there were many search parties and such that went out looking for this doomed cruise. The weather gets rough. They're blown widely off course. They were in the Hawaii area in the Pacific. I think the island they landed at, probably in the Bermuda Triangle, somewhere there, somewhere in the tropical Atlantic. That's why no one ever found them where they were looking.
Okay.
Because this island brigadoons in and out of existence for brief periods of time. It's an island on the move. But it's an island that needs to feed. This kind of big magic island doesn't just feed itself. It needs to grow and prosper and be able to do more things. And then it begins to be aware that there's this magic trunk of many things out there that can help add to its own magical nature. Of course, it sort of sends for and manipulates things so that the trunk finds its way to the island just the same way the ring, the magical ring of Lord of the Rings, yearns to find its way back to Sauron. So, Thurston Howell and company are trapped on this island for, was it 14? I forget. It's been a while since I've looked up the actual continuity. I notice Brad is working the computer even as I speak to see how long were they actually on the island.
Well, the funny thing about that is you started talking about Joe versus the volcano. Apparently a king from another island came to their island looking for someone to sacrifice to a volcano.
Yes.
On Gilligan's Island. So it's a little more in-depth than we even thought.
So,
now, mind you, someone actually went through the effort to try and figure out how long they were really on the island. Allegedly, they're just saying that 11 and a half years is how long it took for the final episode and the final TV movie to come out.
All right.
But
But go ahead.
No one's worked through how long they were actually there.
Right.
In Gilligan years.
Okay. I wanted to say 14, and I think at some point, maybe it was even during that special in which they got off the island, it was announced how many years they'd been gone. But let's say 11 and a half.
Here we go. The film has the characters finally being rescued after 15 years.
15 years, okay, 15 years. So they're 15 years on this island. Now, why? They had so many chances to be rescued or to get off the island themselves. And of course, every time they had a scheme to get off the island, somehow Gilligan f***ed up. Was it Gilligan f***ing up? Or was it the trunk or the island itself saying, no, not yet? Because the island needed a certain amount of time to absorb the magic of this trunk, or trunks. Sometimes there's two of them. They were brought there by Thurston Howell III and Lovey. They were not going to get off the island until the island had gotten its value from them. The island, remember, had to expend a lot of its own energy just to get them there. These were long-term goals, plans. A caper played out over years, perhaps centuries, who knows. But the island finally had this wonderful source of magical power on it. When it had gotten everything it could from them, and only then did it allow one of those schemes to get off the island to succeed. Now remember, other folks were coming and going from that island all the time. And they were finding their way off in the same episode in which they found their way on. It was practically Grand Central Station sometimes with the amount of traffic to and from that island. But it could never work for our castaways. Why is that? Because the island didn't need anything from those other people. Of course it let them go. It was only the efforts of our castaways that it needed to flummox. And only then, because it would include Thurston Howell and Lovey. I don't think the island was necessarily sinister in the sense that one easy way to make sure that the trunks didn't leave the island would be to kill all of them. And then the trunks are there. But I don't think the island was bloodthirsty. As we see the tropical island in Joe versus the volcano, the trunks there were able to save Joe and Meg Ryan. I forget her character's name. So there is a power struggle. Maybe the trunks themselves decided they did not want to give up all their power to the island. So the trunks were working to get off too, but it was no good. The island was too big. The island was big magic. The trunk was just pretty big magic. But when the island had bled the trunk of all of it, the power that it's able to absorb, finally it lets the castaways go. But now the trunks go their own way. They still have some power, but not as much. As you see, their children in Joe versus the Volcano didn't have nearly the oomph of the Howl trunks. What happens to the island?
Once it absorbs all the magic?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know.
Oh, it wasn't just a rhetorical question. I'll tell you what happens to the island. Mr. Rourke finds it.
What?
Gilligan's Island, Fantasy Island. Fantasy Island, which is established as a weird place where your fantasies get to be played out, but there are elements to this that can never quite be explained.
Right.
In the later seasons, they just outright admitted there's magic going on.
So once it absorbed the magic from the trunk...
Gilligan's Island, Fantasy Island, a redundancy. Same place.
Okay.
Remember, the island can brigadoon in and out of several spaces and times and what have you. It was clearly the magic source for Mr. Rourke. Mr. Rourke, who was rumored to have some kind of pact with the devil, was able to exert some measure of control. Not entirely, because the island will never stop yearning for its own agenda. But what was its agenda? Anyway, that is the story or the truth behind Gilligan's Island. Remember, you as a writer, you're trying to find what is it here that takes all of these elements and makes sense of them. Well, the main characters of Gilligan's Island being the island and Howell's trunks, now it starts to make a certain amount of sense. The main character of Fantasy Island was, of course, the island. When Mr. Rourke, who had gotten the better of the island for many years, kind of drained it of its oomph and moved on, there was still residual magic with that island. You don't just use it all up the way you would empty a car's gas tank. Which is why what?
Read the "Oh dear God" in front of that what.
Which is why the same island became home to many castaways in Lost.
So Gilligan's Island.
Fantasy Island.
It's the same.
The Lost Island
that the plane went down on.
To which many amazing things happened, none to few of which were adequately explained. Everyone blames the writers, but the writers didn't understand what island they were really dealing with. It wasn't the characters in Lost. I mean, they were important. They were our point of view. The island. The island was the character. The island was the story. That is the truth behind Gilligan's Island that explains everything. Once you understand that that's what's actually going on, you don't have the problems with characters that should be acting in one way, acting in a different way. The Howells were never the rich people. I mean, they were rich, but with the pedigree that they claimed, of course they would just get on the next boat available, especially if the bad guys are hot on the trail and you wanted some time to yourself where the bad guys would never think. There's like, well, maybe they went on this crappy-ass boat that's clearly falling apart for a 3-hour tour. It's like, oh no, come on.
So Gilligan wasn't the guy causing the problems. He was just the focus of the island.
He was the focus of the island, and of course he was the convenient scapegoat. You got to understand that the island just doesn't wave its hands, which it doesn't have, and say, okay, this is how this is screwed up, and this is how this is screwed up. It needed an agent, so it preyed upon the weakest mind there to do the bumbling things, in many cases, that screwed up this week's rescue attempt, or this week's attempt to build a raft, or this week's attempt to repair the boat, or what have you. Gilligan was the tool of the island as much as everyone. And remember, the Trunks were fighting against this all along. The Trunks it was drawn to this, but now it realizes why, that it was being drained of its powers. It tries to get away too. Remember the time that Howell decided to adopt Gilligan as his heir and kept giving him stuff out of the Trunks and stuff like that? The Trunks put that in his mind. It's like, okay, we need to empower this guy so that he quits f***ing up so that we can get off this island. It was a power struggle all along.
Between the island and the trunk.
Yeah. Brad will be putting this sketch on eBay for whomever wants to to pick it up. I'll go ahead and finish it. I think we're going to get, whenever we have Bigby just standing there leaving a little space, we often throw a wolf shadow behind him to indicate what sort of critter he really is. So I think I'll add that, but we won't make use of it. We've made our point with the truth about Gilligan's Island. But the larger point is that canon? No, I didn't write Gilligan's Island, I didn't write Lost, and I didn't write Fantasy Island. I should have. All you people running writers' rooms out there that aren't availing yourself of me, this kind of story insight, what could you be thinking? But I didn't. But the exercise here is you go into someone else's sandbox, someone else's fictional world, and now you've got to create stories there based on what's happened before and things that don't go against what happened before. Here's an example of looking at what evidence is there based on 4 different shows, if you count Joe versus the volcano. And you can see, oh, here's something that ties it all together, and now it all makes sense. So, writing lesson. Brad, any closing thoughts?
I don't. I hate to say it, but there are times when I look at it and go, that could be true.
Yeah.
And now I look at the new Fantasy Island that's coming out going, God, it's very dark. Has the island gotten mad? Is the island now ready for blood? So, all right. So like we did before, we'll let Bill finish up the sketch and kind of fast forward through it so you can see what's going on. Again, give us a like, subscribe, comment down below. Let us know what you think was really going on with the trunks and the island. And we'll do it again next time.